My wife, well, she pulled a fast one, sold my mother's house right from under my nose, stashed away all that inheritance cash, and shipped my poor mother off to one of those old folks' homes. Never in a million years would I have seen it coming, not from her. See, my wife, she was a sweetheart. Not just with me, but with my mother too. I figured I'd hit the jackpot, a wife any guy would kill to have. She and my mother were as thick as thieves, always making those monthly visits, sometimes more. But I never saw it coming. Didn't think in a million years my wife could pull something that low. Now my family, we weren't hurting for money, old money, the kind that's been around for generations. My father passed away when I was still in college, and after that, it was just me and my mother. She'd raised me right, that's for sure, but you know how it is. Time waits for no one. So, striking out on my own felt like the natural thing to do. Architecture always had my heart. I'd been all over the world, soaking up those grand buildings in Europe, Asia, South America. The historic ones, the sleek, modern ones. It didn't matter. I just wanted to design something that would leave a mark. Private schools, one of those fancy Ivy League universities, that was just the path laid out for me. Landed myself a good job after graduation, working for one of the top firms in the country. Then, on a business trip to Europe, I laid eyes on her. A total knockout, dressed to impress, the most elegant woman in the room. I offered to buy her a drink, but she gave me a polite no thanks. Turns out she was waiting for a friend. Maybe it was a touch of stubbornness, but I couldn't just walk away. Still, had to give her props for sticking to her guns. Next day, there she was at the hotel bar, all by herself, looking down in the dumps, her drink sitting untouched on the table. I sidled up, just to offer a friendly hello. Turned out she'd just had a nasty breakup, flew all the way from Eastern Europe to see this guy, only to get a slap in the face instead. I didn't try to play the hero or anything. Just lent her an ear, which seemed to be exactly what she needed that night. We ended up swapping numbers before I headed back to the States. Plenty of classy ladies out here, sure, but she had something different about her. I've always been a sucker for a traditional woman, and she seemed to fit that perfectly. Making trips to Europe just to see her had turned into my thing. I must have racked up enough frequent flyer miles to circle the globe twice, especially when I could swing those trips for work. We painted the town red in France, took moonlit strolls in Italy. The works, you know. But it wasn't exactly a whirlwind romance. Still, I knew deep down I loved her. And when I finally said it, she seemed happy. Overjoyed? Maybe not, in hindsight, but happy enough. That's what truly kicked our relationship into high gear. When I asked her to move to the States, she didn't hesitate. Problem was, her visa application got the big red stamp of denial. Well, I wasn't about to take that lying down. Hopped on the next flight to Europe and got down on one knee right there in the airport. That time, her smile could have lit up the whole terminal. Maybe it finally convinced her I was serious, or maybe it just greased the wheels with the immigration folks. Before long, we were saying I do, and she was settling into my apartment as Mrs. Wright. Took her to meet my mother for the first time, and wouldn't you know it, they hit it off like a house on fire. Made me feel like I'd won the lottery all over again. We'd swing by to see my mother often, and she'd always light up at the sight of us, especially when the two of them got to spend time together. Made me wonder if it was because my wife grew up an orphan, never really having a mother of her own. That thought tugged at my heartstrings, but in a good way. I was glad she'd found that connection with my mother. They'd go on shopping sprees, hit up those fancy restaurants for lunch, the whole 9 yards. Most modern girls would probably find my close relationship with my mother a bit of a red flag. But that's the thing about my wife. She's so traditional, she actually thought it was sweet, even encouraged it. Then, my wife, bless her kind soul, offered to start visiting my mother on her own. I was over the moon about the idea. Seemed so thoughtful, so selfless. Little did I know she had a whole different agenda brewing. But she didn't start to execute her plans right away. As usual, they kept spending time together. Quality time, my mother would always call it. I did notice a shift in my wife, though. Whenever I'd mention wanting to visit my mother, she'd wave it off. "She's doing just fine, honey. In good hands. I'll swing by for both of us." With a big promotion on the horizon at work, I gotta admit, I liked the idea of not having to worry about it. Thanked my wife for being so supportive, like a good husband should. Then came the day I finally got the promotion. Couldn't wait to share the good news with my mother, but that's when my wife acted real strange. Finally, she broke the news, or what she called the news. "Your mother's in a nursing home. Relax. It was her decision. I just helped her pick out the best one in the city." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Didn't know how to act. Didn't know a single word to say. Just shocked. I stormed out of the house, barely remembering to grab my keys, hopped in the car, and raced over to that nursing home. I didn't know if I was going to hug my mother or strangle my wife. All I knew was that I had to see her right then and there. The place was cleaner than a hospital. That much I'd give it. But it smelled sterile, like old flowers and that cheap disinfectant they use in public restrooms. Found my mother's room and practically kicked the door down. There she was, sitting by the window, looking out at the parking lot. She turned when she heard me, and her face lit up with that same sweet smile she'd always had for me. "Darling, what a surprise." She tried to get up, but I rushed over to her side. "What the hell happened? Why didn't you tell me?" I practically choked on the words, anger and confusion bubbling up in my throat. She patted my hand, her touch soft and gentle. Now, calm down. Your wife was just telling the truth. This place really is lovely. The nurses are so kind, and there's always someone to talk to when I get lonely." "But why?" The word came out small, almost like a plea. "It was my idea," she said, surprising me. "Your wife, she gave me the push I needed. I was getting too old for that big house, and honestly, it felt a little empty sometimes. Here I have friends, activities. It's really for the best." I stared at her, dumbfounded. This couldn't be real. My own mother, defending the woman who'd betrayed her, betrayed us. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her see reason. But all I could do was sink into the chair beside her bed, utterly defeated. The questions were an inferno in my mind. My mother, she'd always been sharp, a master at reading people. How in the world did she fall for my wife's act? And my wife, she'd always been so supportive, knew how much my family meant to me. How could she do this? Shatter my trust like it was nothing. Yet here was my mother, defending her with gentle words and unshakable belief. It didn't make a lick of sense. "But why?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you agree to this? Why would she even suggest it?" My mother gave my hand a comforting squeeze. "Your wife, she's a special woman. It wasn't easy at first, me leaving the house and all, but she made it seem possible. showed me that this could be a good change, a chance for a new adventure. Adventure? My stomach churned. This was no adventure. It was a nightmare. She visited me every week, sometimes more, my mother continued, oblivious to my inner turmoil. We'd have tea, talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes she'd bring books or magazines. She even painted my nails once. She chuckled, the sound light and airy. Every word felt like another nail hammered into the coffin of my understanding. My wife, with her manicured nails and carefully chosen outfits, playing doting caretaker with my mother. The image was so bizarre, so out of character, I felt a surge of nausea. I must not be seeing the whole picture, I mumbled, more to myself than to my mother. Of course you're not, dear, she chirped. You're a busy man. Work, responsibilities. You wouldn't have the time to understand why I needed this change, but your wife, she did. She saw what I couldn't even admit to myself. I was drowning in confusion, my head spinning. Was I missing something? Was there some hidden kindness in my wife, some genuine care for my mother that I'd been blind to all this time? Or was this all part of her twisted plan? I left the nursing home feeling more lost than when I'd arrived. My mind was a jumbled mess of betrayal, desperation, and a nagging sense of unreality. As if on autopilot, I drove back to the apartment, some flicker of hope telling me maybe this had all been a terrible misunderstanding. The apartment door swung open with an ominous creak. I stepped inside, and a wave of confusion washed over me. It wasn't the emptiness I expected. Rather, a strange sense of her presence lingering in the air. My favorite paintings still hung on the wall. The bookshelves remained stocked, the warmth of our home still palpable. And my wife? Nowhere to be found. At first, panic surged through me. Had something terrible happened? But as I moved through the apartment, a different realization dawned. Her closet held only a few basic outfits. Her toiletries were gone from the bathroom. It wasn't an escape, but a carefully planned departure. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment flight, fueled by fear or guilt. This was something calculated, deliberate. The betrayal cut even deeper. Knowing she hadn't just abandoned me, but had meticulously staged her disappearance to inflict maximum confusion and pain. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I raced to my mother's house. My last shred of hope rested there. Maybe my wife had gone to explain herself, to beg forgiveness. I pounded on the door, but only silence answered. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I noticed the "For Sale" sign hammered into the lawn. That's when the truth hit me with the force of a hurricane. The house was sold. The meticulously planned exit. My wife wasn't just gone. She'd played me for a fool. In my mind's eye, I could see her, the woman I thought I loved, laughing as she carefully plotted each step of her grand deception. Her visits to my mother, the gentle concern, the sweet smiles. Every kind word had been a blade slowly twisting in my back. The full scale of her betrayal left me reeling. This wasn't just a theft. It was a complete annihilation of everything I'd held dear. My wife, my home, my trust. All swept away in a meticulously orchestrated scheme. The time had come. Desperation demanded it. I needed to hire a detective.
The world felt like it was spinning out of control. 1 minute, I was on cloud 9, waiting to greet my Joseph at the hotel, to bask in the happiness we'd built together. Then, like a thunderclap, came those dreaded words. We need to talk. The news of his father's death still hung heavy in the air, casting a shadow over everything. Yet, as he spoke, a different kind of devastation washed over me. It wasn't his father's passing that had broken him, it was me. He was ending things, claiming that his demanding career left no room for a personal life. The words were polite, even tinged with regret, but the finality in his eyes was a knife to the heart. Left alone, I sank into a chair at the hotel bar. Joseph was gone, back to his life in the US, and a part of me had gone with him. Tears flowed freely as I ordered a drink, then another. The burn of the liquor was a welcome distraction from the deeper ache in my chest. Through my blurry vision, I noticed a figure hovering nearby. The man from the day before, the one with the confident smile I'd ignored. Now, with my defenses down, my world in ruins, he approached. He started talking, his voice a gentle rumble, but I barely registered the words at first. He was a stranger, a safe harbor in my storm. Someone I could unload my grief onto without judgment. My tongue, loosened by the drinks, spilled out my story. The whirlwind romance with Joseph, the dashed hopes, the crushing pain. This stranger, with his surprisingly empathetic blue eyes, listened. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix things. He simply let me feel the hurt. With every word I uttered, a strange feeling began to rise within me, a sense of detachment from my own heartbreak. The man, a true gentleman, seemed to sense this shift. He leaned closer, his gaze unwavering. I was still shattered, but a flicker of something new ignited within me. Was it curiosity? Perhaps a touch of defiance? My world had been turned upside down, and yet, here was a possibility, an unexpected fork in the road. He eventually left, disappearing into the hotel crowd. Another American, like my Joseph, yet different. There was a depth to him, a mystery behind those kind blue eyes that set him apart. For the rest of the night, his presence lingered in the back of my mind. Then, that unexpected call came, an unfamiliar number flashing on my phone. "David," he said. "David who?" I asked, confused. A gentle laugh answered, then a reminder of that night at the bar, his quiet presence amidst my storm of tears. I hadn't given him my number, yet here he was, a lifeline reaching across the distance. Soon our calls became a regular occurrence, filling the empty spaces left by Joseph's absence. "I'm coming to France," David announced one day. "Let's meet up." I still lived in France then, carving out a new life for myself. A flicker of trepidation danced alongside a strange excitement. What would happen if I met him? I pondered, curiosity winning out. With a touch of recklessness, I agreed. David was different when I saw him in person. His easy smile masked a hint of darkness, a thrilling contrast to his earlier gentle demeanor. And those eyes, they no longer just offered solace. They seemed to hold a question, a challenge I was only beginning to understand. Intrigue blossomed within me, a wildflower pushing through the cracks of my carefully constructed world. Our meetings became frequent, and I started to really like him. But I kept wondering, did I love him? Even now, I can't quite answer that. What drew me to him was his love for his mom. Losing my mom when I was young left a hole in my heart, and I always wished she could be with me. My dad was tough and mean, and I couldn't wait to leave him behind when I turned 18. That's how I ended up in France. In France, I met Joseph, who made me feel special and beautiful in a way I hadn't before. He gave me pretty dresses and gifts, making me feel loved. But then, David surprised me at the airport one day and asked, "Will you marry me?" I hesitated, but then said, "Yes," hoping for a bright future together. Moving to David's place in the United States was exciting. It was my first time there, and I loved the city. But meeting his mom made me nervous and excited at the same time. She was wonderful and spoke French, so we often chatted in French. I grew to love her, maybe because I wanted her to be like my own mom. Languages had always been my forte. English was my first conquest, followed by the lilting beauty of French and the passionate rhythms of Italian. Skillful communication, the ability to bridge worlds, it had always been a source of pride. As our story goes on, life gets more complicated. David is busy with work, and I'm trying to fit into this new place on my own. I find comfort in my close relationship with his mom, who helps me adjust. Joseph is still in the back of my mind, reminding me of the person I became with him. Sometimes, I think about our days in France, feeling a mix of happiness and longing. During one of my routine visits to David's mom, I was taken aback to find Joseph there. It turned out that his father had been the financial advisor for David's family, and now Joseph had stepped into that role. It was clear that he and David's mom had a strong connection, having been a familiar face in the house since his childhood. Joseph's re-entry into my life stirred up a whirlwind of emotions, challenging the stability of my relationship with David. Lingering feelings resurfaced, leaving me in a state of confusion about my true desires. Eventually, Joseph suggested we meet up, and I found myself agreeing, unaware of the potential repercussions. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on a myriad of topics, and it was evident that Joseph still harbored feelings for me. My own feelings, however, were muddled. Out of the blue, Joseph shifted the conversation to David's mom, mentioning her contemplation of moving to a nursing home to be around her peers. After that, we went our separate ways. At my next visit with David's mom, I cautiously brought up the topic of the nursing home. She was keen to discuss it, and I found myself navigating the delicate conversation, offering support, but unsure of what advice to give. The situation underscored the complexity of our intertwined lives and the difficult choices that lay ahead. One day, David's mom called me with a decision made. "I've decided. I'm moving out." I felt compelled to help, so I scoured reviews to find the best facility in the city for her. She eventually moved there, but I was at a loss for how to tell David. The timing couldn't have been worse. David was celebrating a promotion and suggested, "Let's celebrate at my mother's." The words weighed heavily on me, and after a moment of silence, I had no choice but to share the news. David was livid and stormed out. Barely moments later, Joseph called. He revealed he had sold the house, claiming it was his right, given his father's lifelong dedication to David's family. He argued that the lease they owed was the house, now sold for $2 million. Then he proposed I leave with him to France. I was shocked. This wasn't the Joseph I thought I knew. I firmly declined his offer. But now, I faced the daunting prospect of David's return. It felt like I was at the center of this upheaval, responsible for his mother's departure. Unable to bear the weight, I packed essential belongings and fled to another city, withdrawing all my savings. I hoped David would someday understand my actions, but fear and guilt consumed me as I embarked on this uncertain path. As the days turned into weeks, I grappled with a crucial choice: to leave or to stay. Staying posed its own questions. Where would I go? What would I do? Recognizing the inevitability of needing an income, I took a position at a high-end restaurant, seeking some semblance of normalcy. About a month into my new job, an unexpected turn of events unfolded. During one of my shifts, I was approached to join a gentleman at his table, who introduced himself with the air of a detective. My heart sank as the realization hit me. David had tracked me down. Words failed me. All I could muster was silence as the detective escorted me back to the city where it all began. Arriving at David's office, the weight of the moment was palpable. There he was, waiting, and I was engulfed by a whirlwind of emotions: fear, regret, and a faint glimmer of hope for understanding and reconciliation. The journey back felt like a bridge to a past I had fled, yet also a step toward facing the consequences of my actions and the possibility of mending what had been broken.
Seeing Melissa there, a mix of guilt and confusion on her face, stirred a turmoil within me. How could she have let things come to this? The story about Joseph seemed too far-fetched, almost as if she was grasping at straws. Did she really think I'd fall for such a tale? Yet when she showed me those pictures, her and Joseph at the very bar where we first met, her in the dress I adored, it made me pause. Was there a sliver of truth in her words? We had to unravel this mess and find out the truth.
David's gaze bore into me, heavy with a loss of trust. I couldn't blame him. The situation, entangled with Joseph's deceit and the staggering sum of money, seemed insurmountable. The fear of potential legal repercussions loomed over me, yet it was Joseph who deserved to face the consequences for his actions. In a bid to shed light on the truth, I presented David with the picture of Joseph, hoping it might lead us to some resolution.
Feeling the weight of my father's life spent in servitude to David's family, my frustration boiled over. "You've always had everything handed to you, David," I wanted to scream. In my eyes, their wealth had come at the cost of my father's happiness, his potential life squandered in service to them. "Do what you want with me," I challenged. "Jail me, just like you did to my father, in a prison of endless work."
I was taken aback by Joseph's bitterness. I'd always thought of him as almost family. We'd grown up together. My father had supported his, even funded Joseph's education, bringing him back into the fold of our family business. Yet, Joseph harbored a completely different narrative. Torn between anger and a sense of justice, I needed time to think. After some reflection, I decided to visit my mother in the nursing home. She listened quietly to the entire saga, her wisdom shining through when she spoke. "David, don't let anger change who you are. I've always been good at reading people, and I believe in Melissa's innocence and Joseph's pain. Melissa cared for me genuinely, and for Joseph, let him be. Jail won't undo the past. As for the house, we can always buy it back. That's not an issue. But I want you to promise me to act with kindness." I made her a promise, with one condition, that we buy back our family home and she returns to live there. She agreed, and thus Joseph walked away a free man with the $2 million. It wasn't easy. The new owners were reluctant to sell, but I was determined, even if it meant paying a premium. Eventually, we settled on $3 million. It was a steep price, but having my mother back in her home, surrounded by familiar walls filled with memories, made it all worthwhile. Regarding Melissa, I found it hard to let go of my disappointment. Her actions, or rather her lack of transparency, puzzled me. Why hadn't she confided in me? That breach of trust felt irreparable, and I resolved never to forgive her for it. Time passed, and on one of my regular visits to see my mother, now comfortably resettled in her garden, I was taken aback to find Melissa there, engaging my mother in lively conversation. My immediate reaction was one of indignation. I demanded Melissa leave at once and never return. My mother's sharp rebuke, "David, my son, don't be so harsh towards Melissa. Stop it, David," momentarily stunned me into silence. Regaining my composure, I turned to Melissa with a more measured tone, yet firm in my resolve. "Please, I must ask you not to come back again." Yet again, my mother intervened, her voice steady and authoritative. "David, this house is mine, and I decide who is welcome. Melissa is free to visit whenever she pleases." Her words were a clear reminder of my promise to her, to lead with kindness and understanding. Despite my personal feelings, I had to respect my mother's wishes and her autonomy in her own home. The complexity of emotions swirling within me, anger, betrayal, yet a deep respect for my mother's wisdom, left me in a state of quiet reflection on the nature of forgiveness and the enduring bonds of family. "Can we talk?" Melissa's voice was soft but determined. My response was immediate. "Yes, we can. We must." Sensing an opportunity for a much-needed private conversation, my mother, understanding the gravity of the situation, did not object, and we made our way to the kitchen. Once there, I didn't hold back. "Melissa, I loved you truly, but what you did, I can't just overlook it. And I'd really prefer if you didn't visit my mother anymore," I expressed, my emotions raw. Melissa's response was calm yet firm. "David, I get it. I'm not sure I ever loved you in the way you wanted, but I did like you, and I respected you a great deal. I don't think I ever faltered in that respect. You're upset not because of what I did, but because of what I didn't do. And that's fair, but calling me selfish isn't right. It's about your mother too. You can think what you want, and you can say what you want, but I'm not going to stop seeing her. She's the only person left in the world I truly love." Her words struck a chord, leaving me to ponder why she hadn't spoken so candidly before. It was a revelation, shedding new light on her actions and forcing me to reconsider my own stance. Her unwavering commitment to my mother, despite our personal grievances, was a testament to her character, compelling me to reflect on the intricate web of relationships that defined our lives. In the quiet of the kitchen, Melissa's candid words cut through the air, leaving me to ponder over the complexities of our relationship. Her admission, both of respect and the lack of certainty in her feelings, forced me to confront my own rigid stance. The realization that she held such a deep affection for my mother, the one person who had been a constant in both our lives, made me reconsider my harsh judgment. Over time, the ice between us began to thaw. Our encounters, initially stiff and formal during my visits to see my mother, gradually became more relaxed. Watching Melissa interact with my mother, her genuine care and laughter, I began to see her in a new light. The qualities that had drawn me to her in the first place, her strength, her compassion, resurfaced, and I found myself drawn to her once more. Melissa, too, seemed to notice a change. The man she had once known, clouded by anger and resentment, was beginning to show glimpses of understanding and patience. Our shared love for my mother, and the joy it brought her to see us in harmony, became a bridge that slowly reconnected us. As the seasons changed, so did the nature of our relationship. We found ourselves engaging in long conversations, not just about the past, but about our hopes, our dreams, and the lessons we'd learned. The more we talked, the more we realized how much we had grown, and how those changes had shaped us into people who could truly appreciate each other. One afternoon, as we sat in the garden watching my mother tend to her flowers, Melissa turned to me with a soft smile. "You know, I think we've been given a second chance," she said, her hand finding mine. I squeezed her hand in agreement, the warmth of her touch reigniting a spark I thought had been lost. "Let's not waste it," I replied, my heart feeling lighter than it had in months. Our gradual rekindling brought a new sense of peace to the household. My mother, ever the wise matriarch, never said, "I told you so," but her knowing glances and the contentment in her smile spoke volumes. She had always believed in the power of forgiveness and second chances, and seeing us together, moving forward with cautious optimism, was the greatest gift we could have given her. In time, Melissa and I learned to love each other anew, not as the people we once were, but as the individuals we had become. Our love story, once fraught with misunderstanding and pain, was now a testament to the power of growth, forgiveness, and the enduring strength of family bonds. Together, we made a vow to build a future that honored those lessons, promising to cherish each moment and never take our second chance for granted. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing, hitting the like button, and leaving a comment to show your support. Your engagement helps tremendously and encourages more stories like this one. Thank you for being a part of this journey.